Hello and welcome to the Environmental Overview webinar. My name is Joan Kaiser and I'm a member of the USDA RUS ReConnect support team. For about the next hour, we'll provide an overview of the environmental requirements for the ReConnect program. This presentation will provide a high-level outline of the environmental requirements in the ReConnect Funding Opportunity Announcement, or FOA, as well as all applicable environmental compliance requirements included in 7 CFR 1970. We'll begin by presenting some key changes from the FY 2019 FOA related to the environmental requirements. Then we'll walk through completing the environmental components within the ReConnect application, including identifying the project's required level of NEPA review, drawing sites and routes within the construction map, and completing the environmental questionnaires. Next up will be an overview of post-award requirements related to the environmental portions of the FOA and the application. And in the final section of the webinar, we'll discuss site and route descriptions. We'll have some time at the end of the presentation for Q&A, in which Kristen Lowe, Operations Branch Chief for the Telecommunications Program, will help field your questions. Please feel free to submit your questions through the chat box throughout the presentation, and we'll cover as many as time allows. So let's get started by reviewing the environmental requirements in the FOA. Applicants must submit or comply with the listed requirements to be eligible for consideration according to the FOA published on December 12, 2019. Now we're going to move on to the key changes from the FY 2019 Funding Opportunity Announcement. To start, there are a couple of minor changes in the environmental area between last year's FOA and this year's FOA. These changes help clarify USDA expectations. First, project maps or site plans are required to identify cable routes, building locations, tower locations, equipment locations, and all structures and facilities that are part of the project. That means everything you plan on putting on that route must be identified. Second, again this year, USDA will use data provided in the application system to complete the environmental review and may require applicants to provide additional information and studies after the application has been submitted. Now we'll review key requirements in the FOA as they pertain to the environmental sections. First, applicants must adhere to federal environmental laws, statutes, regulations, and executive orders found in 7 CFR 1970. 7 CFR 1970 states that applicants for RUS loan and grant program must propose projects that avoid or minimize negative environmental impacts. This regulation establishes how RUS will oversee and comply with required environmental authorizations and permits. Some of these environmental regulations include the National Environmental Policy Act of 1969, or NEPA, Section 106 of the National Historic Preservation Act of 1966, referred to as NHPA, and Section 7 of the Endangered Species Act of 1973, or ESA. These three examples are only 3 of the 40-plus laws, statutes, and regulations found in 7 CFR 1970. And I'll talk more about those environmental statutes in a few slides. The second FOA requirement to keep in mind states that applicants must provide completed environmental questionnaires, known as EQs, which consist of project descriptions for environmental review purposes. These include site and route questionnaires, a project questionnaire which captures the appropriate environmental information for the overall project, and the National Historic Preservation Act Section 106 project questionnaire, which is required when a site or route has the potential to interfere with historic properties. Third, sorry, we have a bit of a delay on the slides here. There we go. Third, it is the applicant's responsibility to obtain all necessary federal, tribal, state, and local governmental permits and approvals necessary for the proposed construction. However, permits are not required at the time of application, but you will need them before you break ground on your project. Fourth, applicants will also be required to cooperate with the agency in identifying feasible measures to reduce or avoid any identified adverse environmental impacts. And finally, the ReConnect program is covered under the National Programmatic Agreement, or NPA, which USDA, the National Conference of State Historic Preservation Officers, and the Advisory Council on Historic Preservation executed in 2018 for sequencing Section 106 reviews. Please note, the NPA can only be applied to federally managed or tribal lands if the land management agency or tribe formally agree to its use. Now let's move on to the RD environmental requirements. The requirements found at 7 CFR 1970 establish the policies and procedures to ensure that RD complies with NEPA and other applicable environmental requirements so that the agency can make better decisions based on an understanding of the environmental consequences of proposed actions and subsequently take actions that protect, restore, and enhance the quality of the environment. There are 3 subparts within NEPA that I'd like to highlight for you. 7 CFR 1970 subpart B defines NEPA categorical exclusions, or CEs, which apply to projects considered not to have individually or cumulatively significant effect on the environment, and most applicants will fall under one or more of these CEs. The other 2 subparts that we'd like to highlight today are important because they could pertain specifically to construction projects. Subpart H, which is Section 106 of the National Historic Preservation Act of 1966, and Subpart N, which is Section 7 of the Endangered Species Act of 1973. The agency and all ReConnect applicants must comply with these regulations, as well as more than 40 other statutes, executive orders, and regulations applicable to agency programs. Now let's turn our attention to completing the environmental components within the ReConnect application. There are a few things applicants should consider before beginning to address the environmental components of the ReConnect application. It's important to note that applicants will need to complete both the Project tab and the Environmental tab within the application system to satisfy environmental components of the application. So we'll start with the Project tab right now. In this section, applicants enter high-level information on their proposed project. It's broken into 2 subsections: project information and required level of NEPA review. In the Project tab, you describe the project and identify the type of technology that will be employed. It's important that you provide a brief summary of what project activities are and where the project will take place. Completing the project information will allow you to complete the next subsection, which is required level of NEPA review. When you enter this part of the application, you're informed that RD has identified classes of actions. The levels of environmental review required for your application and agency actions are listed in Subpart B, categorical exclusions, Subpart C, environmental assessments, and Subpart D, environmental impact statements. And you're required to answer 2 questions. The first question states, is the proposed action one that Rural Development has identified as requiring an environmental impact statement, EIS, or has an EIS been prepared due to the involvement of another federal agency? If you respond no to this question, just move to the next one. If you respond yes, an optional upload field appears in the application. And if an EIS has been prepared due to the involvement of another federal agency, you would upload it here. Moving on to the second question, which states, is the proposed action one that Rural Development has identified as requiring an environmental assessment, or EA, or has an EA been prepared due to the involvement of another federal agency? And again, if you answer no, just proceed to the next portion of the application. If you answer yes, then you will need to upload an EA if one has been prepared due to the involvement of another federal agency in the upload tool that appears below the question. If an applicant responds yes to either question, an environmental impact statement or an environmental assessment is required. Therefore, the applicant must contact RUS at the email address reconnect@usda.gov for guidance. You don't have to answer this third question immediately regarding your contact with RUS, but you must contact RUS for guidance for an EA or EIS before submitting the application, and you must upload evidence of the consultation. Failure to provide evidence of this contact and guidance will result in RUS finding the application ineligible. And do keep in mind that at any time during the application process, an applicant might decide to get assistance from a third-party environmental consultant in completing their application. This is considered a professional service. And according to the FOA, pre-application expenses are any reasonable expenses as determined by RUS incurred after the release of the FOA to prepare an application or to respond to RUS inquiries about the application. The last section in the project tab is the project information documents. As previously stated, if applicants answer yes to either the required level of NEPA review questions, they will upload an EA or EIS related to their proposed project in this section. You can also upload your evidence of environmental consultation with RUS if that's required here as well. Now let's move to the environmental tab of the application. The first section within the environmental tab is the construction map. The construction map is where you're required to draw your sites and routes. Sites include assets such as newer existing facilities, towers, parking lots, access roads, and large cabinet installations. Routes are paths in which the proposed technology will be installed. The map includes 14 different environmental resource layers, such as flood hazard zones and national wetlands inventory layers, which will inform the environmental questionnaires process. Applicants must understand that the resources their project intersects with will impact how you fill out the EQs. In addition, the depth of detail in the project description will also inform the environmental review process. And you should note that the resources seen as layers in the map will come up again in the EQs, which reference specific subparts of 7 CFR 1970. The next section in the environmental tab is called Site/Route Descriptions. As mentioned in the previous slide, sites and routes are drawn on the construction map. Sites will include assets, again, such as newer existing facilities, towers, parking lots, access roads, and large cabinet installations. Existing sites or central offices that will house ReConnect-funded equipment must also be identified as a site on the construction map, and the type of equipment installed must be described in the system. To better inform the environmental review process, applicants should create multiple routes to delineate different technology types, installation methods, and right-of-way requirements. After all sites and routes and their respective shapes have been created on the construction map, you must enter descriptions for each site and route. Project site and route descriptions will specify the types of facilities to be built or upgraded at each location. These descriptions will be used in conjunction with the EQs to determine the anticipated environmental and regulatory impact from construction or installation activity. And do keep in mind, you can't enter a description for a site or a route before you create that site or route in the construction map. And this section must be completed before an applicant begins the environmental questionnaire section, because again, information provided here will determine the requirements for the EQ section. We'll continue to discuss site and route descriptions in a little greater detail later on in the presentation. Only after the sites and routes have been drawn on the construction map is an applicant ready to complete the environmental questionnaires, or EQ. EQs are downloadable, fillable PDF forms that applicants will fill out and upload to the ReConnect application system. You must complete up to 3 types of EQs. Site and route questionnaires is the first type, a project questionnaire is the second, and the last is an NHPA Section 106 project questionnaire. As a reminder, don't begin your EQs until you've completed the prior environmental sections, because the construction map and the site and route descriptions inform what types of questionnaires are required for the application. When you access the EQ page under the Environmental tab, you'll be required to check a box that you have completed the construction map and corresponding site and route descriptions. Once the checkbox has been selected, a message will display informing the applicant whether an NHPA Section 106 EQ is required for the application. After you check the box, click Save to save the response in the system. The construction map and the site and route descriptions will then be locked after the response is saved. If you need to go back and change the construction map or descriptions after you've locked them, uncheck this box one more time and click Save again. Once you've made all of your changes to the construction map or the site and route descriptions, come back to this page and select the checkbox one more time and click Save one more time so that you can submit the application. The next few slides will provide some details on the 3 types of EQs that applicants may be required to complete. All applicants must fill out a site or route EQ for each site and each route in the project. The site and route EQs will capture the appropriate environmental information for each proposed site and route. This information will be used in conjunction with the project EQ to determine the overall environmental compliance of the proposed project. And here are a few things to keep in mind when you're completing your site and route EQs. The information contained in the site and route EQs must be consistent with the construction map and the corresponding site and route descriptions. Many of the responses to the questions in the site and route EQs are based on different layers contained within the construction map. When you're completing the EQs, you should ensure that the appropriate features and options are selected on the construction map. And do bear in mind, user errors on the construction map will likely cause incorrect EQs and may lead RUS to finding an application to be ineligible, so do take care. Once the sites and routes have been completed on the construction map, go to the EQ page and scroll down until you reach the tables listing the sites and routes to find the Endangered Species Act information. You must review the official list of endangered species for each site or route in order to complete the EQ. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service IPAC Planning Tool opens in another browser tab after you click the official list button. You'll need a free account to access the IPAC Planning Tool as described in the site and route EQs. Keep in mind, listed marine species are managed by the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration fisheries offices. So projects occurring in water or near water should obtain lists from the appropriate fisheries office. Now we'll move on to the project EQ. This EQ captures the appropriate environmental information for the overall proposed project. This information will be used in conjunction with each site and route EQ to determine the overall environmental compliance of the proposed project. And there are a few things to keep in mind here too. The site and route EQs inform the answers to the project EQ. Only one project EQ is needed per project, unless an exceptional circumstance occurs. And here are two examples of that. First, if a project had construction in two geographically unrelated areas with environmental impacts that are different in each location. Or second, if there are multiple service areas in an application, you might need to fill out a project EQ for each service area if they are geographically dissimilar. Now we'll move on to the NHPA Section 106 EQ. The application system includes several built-in validations that help determine whether applicants are required to complete an NHP Section 106 EQ. The validations are based on the construction map and the site and route descriptions. If you are prompted to fill out this EQ, it's in the applicant's best interest to consult a professional cultural resources contractor or consultant who meets the Secretary of Interior's professional qualification standards to prepare the Section 106 information and to assist with the completion of this material. The Section 106 EQ contains specific Section 106 questions. We're just about to wrap up the EQ sections, so here are a couple of things to keep in mind before we move on. You can find EQs under the Forms and Resources section on the ReConnect website today. And hyperlinks to the relevant sections of the 7 CFR 1970 regulation are included in the EQ documents for your reference. And do bear in mind, completing the EQs does not represent the full completion of the environmental section of the application. Applicants may be contacted for additional information regarding the environmental compliance of the proposed project. The last tab in the environmental section is for environmental documents. Applicants can view, download, delete, and replace any documents previously uploaded within the environmental section of the application on this page. And again, you should complete your construction map and site and route descriptions and the EQs before starting to upload documents here. The system will allow you to upload environmental documents after creating at least one site or route, but it's best to wait until you're done. Now we're going to move on to a short consideration of additional environmental documents. As I mentioned before, USDA may request applicants to submit additional environmental documentation after an application is submitted on a case-by-case basis. According to the FOA, if additional information is requested, an applicant will have up to 30 calendar days to submit the information. If such information is not submitted in a timely manner, USDA may reject the application. And again, according to the funding opportunity announcement, if additional information is required after an application is accepted for funding, funds can be withheld by the agency under a special award condition requiring that the awardee submit additional environmental compliance information sufficient for USDA to assess any impacts that a project might have on the environment. And a couple of quick examples of that documentation. One might be evidence of consultation with federal, state, or local agencies, and another might be description of mitigation measures. Here are a few tips to consider before you start taking on the environmental components in the application. Clearly identify and describe your sites and routes on the construction map. Understand and be aware of which environmental and historic resource areas that your project will impact. Determine whether the project will affect floodplains, wetlands, or other resources. Identify if the proposed project will require new rights of way or if it can be built within an existing rights of way. Establish your U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service account and contact the appropriate NOAA office to get endangered species information early on in the process. And finally, facilitate early consultation with resource agencies. Now we'll move on quickly to post-award requirements. Pursuant to the FOA, the USDA will require applicants to adopt and adhere to the following environmental reporting requirements and guidelines. You must inform USDA if there are any deviations from the proposed project plan after obligation. USDA must approve any change and will engage the environmental staff to confirm compliance. And again, if additional information is required after an application is accepted for funding, funds can be withheld by the agency under a special award condition that requires the awardee to submit additional environmental compliance information sufficient for USDA to assess any impacts that a project might have on the environment. Now we're going to dive a little bit deeper into sites and routes to give you a little better understanding of how you create your site and route descriptions. So how do you navigate to the site and route descriptions? Keep in mind that you should have already named and drawn your sites and routes on the construction map before starting on the descriptions. So you do start by going to the environmental tab, as you can see on the screen, and then to the site and route descriptions page. Keep in mind, a route is the path which the proposed technology will be installed in. And sites include assets such as new or existing facilities, towers, parking lots, access roads, and large cabinet installations. Installation of network and access equipment, antennas, or small cell equipment at an existing facility must be included as a site on the construction map. To better inform the environmental review process, applicants may create multiple routes to delineate different technology types and installation methods. Before I walk through how to create a site or a route, you should keep in mind that you don't really want to turn on all 14 of the layers on the construction map at the same time when you zoom in. Creating sites and routes. To start, let's just take a quick look at the map and the menu. The first thing you do is you click the menu in the top left corner of the construction map, those three small horizontal lines. Then click the Sites and Routes menu on the menu to display the Sites and Routes table on the top right of the screen, which you can see here. To add a site, click the Add Site or Route under the Sites and Routes heading. Then click the site or route name field and enter an applicable site or route name. As these names are referenced throughout this section of the application, you should use descriptive or concise names whenever possible. This will reduce the potential for errors. Another helpful tip is to name the sites and routes with a common naming convention, which includes, for instance, the affiliated service area or common network facilities. Next, click the project location type drop-down menu and then select site or route, depending on the project location type. If you select route, the please specify the width of this route field will appear with a default value of 75 feet. You can edit this field for a value anywhere between 25 and 500 feet. Click Save to save the site or route and proceed to drawing its location on the map. Alternatively, applicants can create all sites and routes before drawing them on the construction map. To draw a site or route, first select the site or route's name on the Site and Routes table. Once selected, the site line item appears highlighted in blue. Before starting the drawing, you might want to zoom into the portion of the map where the site or route will be located to optimize your drawing precision. After choosing the site or route, use the drawing tools on the right side of the map to draw the site. Include a reasonable buffer when you're drawing routes. And do keep in mind that the polyline tool will not be available for drawing sites and the polygon, rectangle, and circle tools will not be available for drawing routes. And do remember, to better inform the environmental review process, you might create multiple routes to delineate different technology types and installation methods. After you've created all sites and routes and drawn their respective shapes, you must enter descriptions for each site and route. Project site and route descriptions will specify the types of facilities to be built or upgraded at each location and the estimated environmental and regulatory impact from construction or installation activity. Applicants cannot enter a description for a site or route before they create it in the construction map. And this section must be completed before you begin the EQ section because, again, information provided here will determine the requirements for the EQ section. To add site and route descriptions, you click the Site Route Descriptions link on the Application System menu. The site descriptions and the route descriptions page will display, as you can see here. Any sites or routes previously drawn on the construction map will be listed in the table. Click Edit Description next to the applicable site to enter a description. The application will ask a series of questions for each site and route. And those questions include, is the proposed site located on or does it cross tribal lands? Is the proposed site located on or does it cross federally managed lands? Is the route new or upgrading or rebuilding existing telecommunications facilities? Is the route in a previously developed existing right-of-way? What's the installation method? And will associated cabinets or underground vaults be installed nearby in previously disturbed or developed land? Now we're going to walk through two different examples of completing different types of descriptions. The first example is how to complete the description for a large enclosure cabinet. This is a new site option available in this round. We added this option in the system to account for equipment located in the large enclosure cabinets. After that, I'll walk through how to complete the description for a tower, which can be a bit more complex. So again, for the large cabinet installation, for the large enclosure cabinet, from the site description page, under the New Asset section, you click the Name field and enter the applicable name for the large enclosure cabinet. Then, click the Type field drop-down menu and select Large Enclosure Cabinet. Finally, click the Add and Continue button. The cabinet's name description page displays, and so you'll need to select the applicable response to the following questions. Is this an existing cabinet or a cabinet to be constructed? Will there be any improvements made to an existing cabinet? Is the applicant proposing to install any network and access equipment in this cabinet? If you answer yes, please select the type of equipment that will be installed, and do select every one that applies. The options include antenna, batteries, and rack-mounted equipment. Then click the Save and Continue button. The Return to Site page will display, so click the Return to Site button, and then the Site Description page will display again. Repeat all of these previous steps within this section for any other asset type. And the recently added asset will appear under the Large Enclosure Cabinet table. The following options display for that asset: Describe to edit the previous answers, or Delete to remove the asset. Now we'll walk through how to add a tower. On the site description page, under the New Asset section, click the Name field and enter the applicable name for the tower. Then click the Type field drop-down menu and select Tower. And finally, click the Add and Continue button. The tower's name description page will then display, and you'll select the applicable response to the question, is this an existing tower or a tower to be constructed? The example on the screen is for a new tower because we chose to be constructed. When you select to be constructed, you'll have to answer what type of tower is going to be built. For this example, we'll select Guide Tower. Then you'll see a message. Please indicate the total limits of disturbance that will be required in feet. So you'll input the applicable length, width, and depth in the corresponding fields. Then answer the next question. Is the land or this tower or pole currently owned by the applicant, leased, or to be purchased? If you click Leased, an Upload field appears, which is where you'll upload the applicable tower lease agreement document. The next question then comes up. Is an FCC license required for this tower or pole? Just select the applicable response. Then answer, what is the height of this tower or pole in feet? And again, choose the applicable response. The next question is the applicant proposing to install any network and access equipment on this tower or pole? If you answer no, just go to step 10, which asks about whether you're going to install a generator. If you answer yes to proposing to install network or access equipment, you'll need to select all types of equipment that will be installed by checking the applicable text boxes. Next, a question comes up that asks, are you co-locating, upgrading, or installing a new antenna? And again, choose the applicable checkbox responses. And finally, is an FCC license required for any of this equipment? And just answer the question. Another question then comes up, and this is the one about the generators. Is an applicant proposing to install a generator at this tower or pole? If you answer no, just continue from step 15 to save the entered information and return to the site description page. If you answer yes, that you do propose to install a generator, you'll proceed to the next step. You're going to need to answer some questions about the generator. First is, how many generators will be installed at the tower or pole? Just provide the answer. The next question is, please select the types of generators that will be installed. You can select the type as either backup generator or primary generator, and you can select both generator types. Next up is, what is the installation method for the generators? Again, using the checkboxes, select all of the applicable answers. Regardless of which answers you pick, you will be asked the following question. Please indicate the total limits of disturbance that will be required in feet. Input the applicable length, width, and depth in the corresponding fields. Then click the Save and Continue button. That will return you to the Return to Site page. Go ahead and click the Return to Site button, and you will be back at the site description page. Repeat all of the previous steps within this section for any other to-be-constructed tower asset types. The recently added asset type appears under the Towers table, and you have the following options for that asset. Describe to edit the previous answers, or delete to remove the assets. Here are some available resources. Oops, I'm sorry, I'm getting a little ahead of the slide. Here we go. Here are some available resources for you to find out more information on the environmental section of the ReConnect application. First up is 7 CFR 1970 Title VII Agriculture, which is available at the hyperlink on the screen. The environmental questionnaires for specific subparts of the 1970 environmental regulation are available now on the ReConnect website under the Forms and Resources section. And in addition to the hyperlinks located in each EQ, RD's entire regulation, subparts, guidance, and templates can be found online at https://rd.usda.gov. USDA Rural Development is providing resources and technical assistance to the applicants as they prepare to apply for the ReConnect program. You can view and register for upcoming events on the ReConnect website. RD plans to continue facilitating webinars addressing frequently asked questions and additional specific aspects of the application. And past webinar materials are available on the ReConnect website. The ReConnect website itself is also a great resource for additional information. It contains program details, fact sheets, and technical assistance materials that can be used when developing your application. Also be sure to review the full FY 2020 funding opportunity announcement located under Forms and Resources. And do please note, resources and information on the site will be continuously updated and added to as we approach the application window, so please be sure to check back often. In addition, USDA is maintaining a help desk to respond to questions submitted through the ReConnect website. And finally, USDA encourages you to reach out to your General Field Representative, or GFR, for more guidance related to your unique project and community. This concludes the Environmental Overview webinar, and we'll now take a few minutes to answer your live questions from the audience. But first, I'd like to introduce Kristen Lowe, Operations Branch Chief for the Telecommunications Program, and Olivia Tuttle of the ReConnect support team. They'll be facilitating today's Q&A session.
Hello, I am Olivia Tuttle, and I am joined by Kristen Lowe, as Joan just mentioned. I'm going to read through the submitted questions, and Kristen will answer them as time allows. If we do not get to your question during today's presentation, please submit it through the Contact Us form on the ReConnect website, and we will follow up accordingly. Before we get started, I would like to mention that if you have any very specific applicant questions, please submit them through the Contact Us form on the ReConnect website to get individualized responses. And I'll just go ahead and read the first few questions that I can go ahead and answer, and then we'll move on to asking some questions of Kristen. The first, can a previous environmental study be used in the application process if it covers 90% of the PFSA? An applicant must provide an environmental analysis of all proposed funded service areas within an application to be eligible. A recent environmental study could be used to satisfy or support the environmental information requested, but additional information will be required for areas not supported by the existing study at the time of the application. You should also update any changes since the current study, so all current environmental information is represented within the application. The next question, what will be required for the environmental portion of the application? Are maps required of the planned routes if claiming categorical exclusion? And the answer to that is that project maps or site plans are required to identify cable routes, building locations, tower locations, equipment locations, and all other structures and facilities that are part of the project. Applicants will be required to draw sites and routes using the construction mapping tool in the ReConnect application system. The application system will also require that applicants provide specific information on the cable routes and facility locations, including the completion of environmental questionnaires. All project activities, specific project locations, and supporting documentation must be provided to assist the agency's analysis of potential impacts on the environment, including whether a categorical exclusion applies to an area in a proposed project. The application guide will also address the specific requirements for the environmental portion of the submittal and will be available when the application system goes live. The next question, if an area is predominantly national forest, but people live there and an applicant wants to place a tower structure, does the applicant work with the national forest or just the private property owner? The answer to that is that if the map shows the area as Forest Service property, the applicant must work with the Forest Service unless the applicant has proof of it as private property. The specifics of the property will need to be analyzed, and the applicant must prove that the property is truly private and not Forest Service owned. The next question, does an applicant need to hear back from USDA about EA or EIS before submission? Yes, if you indicate yes for either the EA or EIS questions, the system will require an upload as proof that you contacted USDA. The next question we have here is, where do I find a professional cultural resources consultant in over to Vermont? Kristen, can you answer that for us?
Sure. So this is also identified in the environmental questionnaire for NEPA Section 106, but if the applicant chooses to consult a cultural resources contractor, we can't recommend the contractor to use. However, the contractor must meet the Secretary of Interior's professional qualification standards used by the National Park Service. And we'll provide a URL to the professional qualification standards for all of the viewers to reference.
The next question we have here, when drawing routes on the construction map, should it be on the specific side of the road for planned construction, or can it be drawn just on the road where construction will take place? Because during construction, sometimes the landowner will not give rights of way to cross their property, and then the cable has to be rerouted to the other side of the road.
That's a very good question. So as part of the construction map process, when you're drawing or uploading shapefiles of your sites and routes, one of the items that you're going to have to answer under the route is you'll be required to specify the width of the route. The field appears with a default value of 75 feet. Applicants can edit this field for a value between 25 feet and 500 feet. So it's up to the applicant. If you believe that you might not be able to receive right-of-way on the one side of the road in which you're proposing, you should buffer at a greater value so that environmental review covers both sides of the road.
Okay, we have another question here. If a large cabinet is to be located within the existing right-of-way where we are proposing to place fiber, do you still have to show this cabinet as a site?
No, there's a question that is asked during the route description process. Will cabinets or underground vaults be installed in a previously disturbed or developed land? You will be drawing the large enclosure cabinets under the sites only.
The next question, what is the definition of a large enclosure cabinet?
So there's no clear definition between a large enclosure cabinet or a smaller cabinet that's akin to a handhold. For that reason, in addition to identifying the two different types of cabinets, we included hyperlinks inside of the system that will bring you to images of the difference between a smaller handhold cabinet or a large enclosure cabinet. But essentially what we're looking for is a large enclosure cabinet that is including additional network and access equipment that's funded or financed using RUS funds, or includes a generator or equipment such as that.
Okay, we have another question here. In round one, 600-yard zoom work for some layers, but not for others. Are there recommended zoom levels for each layer?
So with both the service areas mapping tool and the construction mapping tool, we're leveraging a number of different web map services. Unfortunately, depending on which source is the source of that web map service is whether or not we can programmatically change the zoom level of that web map service. So for example, the floodplains that's available from FEMA, unfortunately applicants have to zoom in very close to the site or route that's uploaded to see whether or not there's overlap with one of the FEMA identified floodplains. With some of those layers, if we're able to find a secondary layer that could be also used or helpful in support of the primary layer, we also provided that. So for example, we also have a flood frequency layer, which we are now leveraging Esri hosted flood frequency layer, where the data is coming from NRCS soils data. And we were able to adjust the zoom so that you'll be able to see the different classifications for flood frequency at a much higher level than you would using the FEMA floodplains level.
The next question we have is about shapefiles. Can you speak to the process of creating and uploading a shapefile?
Sure. So for the construction map, when you are drawing a route or uploading a shapefile of a route, you can include either a polygon or a polyline or polylines. So if you're including a polyline, the one thing that you don't want to do is contain or have the shapefile contain self-intersecting polylines. That will generate an error message in the map. Additionally, if your shapefile includes a feature where the polylines are incredibly close to each other and we're buffering, because when we end up opening up the shapefile and the system writes it to our data warehouse, it's getting buffered and stored as a polygon. If any of the polygon boundaries end up intersecting with each other, there will be an error associated with that upload, and you'll have to upload a new shapefile. If you want specific specs associated with the shapefiles, we can send that out after the webinar.
We'll give it just a couple minutes. Please feel free to submit any additional questions at this time. While we are taking additional questions, I'd like to just mention that we will have our next webinar on February 5th at 1:00 p.m. Eastern Time, and that will cover the application system. We also would like to mention that there are several upcoming workshops that you can view and register for on the ReConnect website under the events page. So please be sure to take a look at those upcoming events.
And one more item to note, we'll be encouraging this at the different workshops and then also the webinars, but we are tweaking some of the language in each of the 3 environmental questionnaires. So if you already downloaded EQs for round 2, please go back to the website. They will be made available on or before January 31st. It's not going to involve a significant level of effort if you have already completed the EQs that are on our website today. Again, based on our experience with round 1, we tried modifying the language to make sure we're capturing exactly what information is required in order to expedite the environmental review process. So there was a follow-up question saying that, I didn't dive into the actual process of creating a shapefile. That's a little more complex, and it depends on the software that you're currently leveraging, whether it be ArcMap or ArcGIS Pro, that kind of thing. So if anyone has specific questions on how to create shapefiles in order to upload them into the system, they can certainly follow up with me directly, and we can talk about that process.
Just go ahead and submit any questions. We have just a couple minutes left here. If there are no additional questions, we can go ahead and wrap up the presentation for today. Again, please look out on the ReConnect website for upcoming webinars and workshops. Thank you for participating in today's event.